Hello. In this presentation, I will present a paper written by me and Professor Roberto Zamparelli, named Multilingualism Encourages Recursion, a transfer study with Multilingual BERT. Massively multilingual models are neural networks that can perform an NLP task in multiple languages, relying on a shared set of parameters. Right now, the state-of-the-art is achieved by transformer-based networks, such as XLM or Multilingual BERT. These models are surprisingly effective in cross-lingual, zero-shot cross-lingual transfer, which is a procedure that involves the training of a model in a set of n languages and then its application to another language that was not included during training. These models are usually derived from monolingual models without any major architectural changes with respect to their monolingual counterparts. BERT is a widely employed network that has been adapted as a massively multilingual model. It is a 12-layer language representation model designed to produce deep bidirectional representations from unlabeled text, relying on both left and right context across layers. It is trained through a masked language modeling objective, which is analogous to what in experimental psychology is called a closed procedure. Multilingual BERT is identical under every aspect with respect to monolingual BERT, with the only exception that it has been trained not only on one single language, but in 104 languages. These models are relevant in NLP and in cognitive sciences. For instance, from a linguistic standpoint, they could inform us on the presence of latent regularities in different language spaces. Then, from a psychological perspective, the study of the representations of different languages in a single model is remindful of the debate of the cognitive underpinnings of different languages in the bilingual brain. And the study of their behavior is, of course, related to different subfields of AI research, such as representation learning and explainable AI in general. So in the study, we ask whether these models extract language-independent regularities from the input they are fed with, and in particular, to which extent these regularities are aligned with language universals. We focus in particular on the Zipf's law and on recursion. The Zipf's law states that the word's frequency of occurrence is inversely related to their frequency rank. However, this law is not language specific, as it has been found in different human-created systems, such as mathematical formulas, musical notation, and the social sciences in general. Differently from the Zipf's law, recursion has been proposed to reflect a biology-driven cross-linguistic universal in the generativist tradition. Hauser et al. In 2002 identified the narrow faculty of language with just recursion, which would constitute the uniquely human component of natural languages. It allows languages to be generative and productive, since recursive rules can be reapplied to their own output. So with a recursive rule, such as the one that you can find here on the left, that has the same non-terminal symbol both on the left and on the right of the formula, if the rule is applied, then it can be reapplied to its own output, generating sequences unbounded in length. So how can we inspect whether massively multilingual models have encoded the language universals that we are studying? We chose to employ transfer learning as a tool for analyzing the encoding of grammatical structures in neural language models. This method allows to assess the structural awareness of a neural language model by studying how the input acts as a learning bias when transferring the model from one symbolic system to another. So in Papadimitriou and Juravsky's study, they trained the model on artificial corpora and tested it on natural language data, while we inverted the direction of the transfer, applying a pre-trained model to artificial data. In order to derive a metric for the performance of the transfer, we employed a procedure which was an adaptation of BERT's native masked language modeling functionality. So in MLM, 15% of the tokens randomly selected are substituted by a mask, whereas in our procedure, all the tokens are masked iteratively after setting the model in evaluation mode. And this allows us to derive a comprehensive sentence-wise metric. So in the first time step of the procedure, the first token is substituted by a mask, and then the model has to predict it relying on the right context. And the probability assigned to the first token is stored. Then in the second time step, the mask slides by one position to the right, and then the model can rely on both left and right context to predict the token, the masked token. The procedure is repeated until the end of the sequence, and then the probabilities assigned to all the tokens in the sequence are averaged. In our study, we evaluated the predictive behavior of BERT and multilingual BERT on a set of 4 artificial corpora, characterized by increasing structural complexity. The first kind of structures that we employed in our study were nested brackets, which were sequences of nested matching symbols. They were generated by employing a probabilistic context-free grammar that created sequences with nested dependencies, where the pairing arcs between the depending tokens never crossed. The second condition in our study were flat brackets, which were sequences of tokens that were paired, but the arcs pairing them could cross, and so the dependencies did not necessarily nest. Crucially, these sequences were composed by the same tokens as the nested brackets, so the sequences had the same length. Then we added a Zipfian corpus where the tokens were sampled from a Zipfian distribution, and a random corpus where the tokens were sampled from a uniform distribution. And as you can see from the table, the 4 corpora were organized in a hierarchy of structuredness, where each corpus could exhibit from 0 up to 3 structural and distributional properties. And of course, the most structured corpus were the nested brackets, which had a Zipfian distribution, pairing, and nesting, whereas the random corpus had none of these features. Our results showed that multilingual BERT behaved in accordance with the hierarchy of structuredness that I just mentioned, with higher performance scores associated with higher structuredness. On the other hand, the performance of the 2 networks started to diverge in the flat brackets and the nested brackets corpora. So while multilingual BERT assigned the highest probability scores to the nested bracket corpus, BERT did not behave in the same way and assigned the highest probability to the flat brackets. The fact that both models showed a facilitation induced by the Zipfian corpus with respect to the randomized baseline suggests that both models were expecting a non-uniform distribution of the tokens. Then the fact that both BERT and multilingual BERT's predictive behavior were improved by implementing flat dependencies in the input highlights the role of pairwise head-dependency type structures in the structural embeddings of the transformer networks. The fact that only the multilingual model was advantaged by the presence of nested dependencies suggests that the high surface inconsistency of the cross-lingual input elicited the model to boast on stronger structural abstractions that are hierarchical and recursive representations. In the study, we analyzed the generalizations created by massively multilingual models by quantifying their alignment to different cornerstones in quantitative and theoretical linguistics. And we showed that while both models were facilitated by the presence of a Zipfian distribution of the tokens and head-dependency type structures in the input, only the multilingual model was facilitated when hierarchy and recursion were implemented. This suggests that some of the representations learned by multilingual deep learning models are not very distant from the ones that were discovered by theoretical linguists, highlighting the importance of a deeper cross-disciplinary integration between these two fields. In the study, we employed the transformer networks as out-of-the-box masked language models and tested their predictive behavior on artificial data. However, it would be interesting to study the model's inner mechanisms that underlie their preference for one structure versus another. Second, as you may recall, we defined constituents as being marked by boundaries created by repeating certain tokens at the beginning and at the end of a constituent. But repetition is not a natural way to mark constituent boundaries and is not very common in natural languages. And this limitation brings us to the third point, that is the fact that we need to test whether the preference for certain structures that we showed in this experiment are reflected when the models process actual natural language. So we leave to future research and evaluation of the structural biases operating in mono and multilingual models in a more naturalistic setting. Thank you for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions.